Back in the 1800s, all the cool kids wanted colonies, and by the cool kids, I mean the European empires. The New World had already been colonized and gained independence, so the Europeans turned their eyes to Africa. The scramble for Africa involved the invasion and colonization of the African continent. After the scramble for Africa, all the continent was divided into European colonies, with only Ethiopia and Liberia remaining independent. This video is about the story of Liberia, from its founding to life there today. To understand the history of Liberia, we have to begin with the United States. The people of the US have been historically racist since their own independence from Britain, and they didn't think that they would be able to coexist peacefully with people of color, even if they were free. Now, Britain had been relocating freed slaves to the colony of Freetown in Sierra Leone, and the wealthy African-American ship owner Paul Cuffey thought it was a great idea, so he started sending his own black Americans to a colony in Africa. Cuffey died in 1817 after transporting only 38 Americans to Freetown before dying, but his efforts did get the public's attention. The American Colonization Society was founded in 1817 by Charles F. Mercer and Robert Finley, and their goal was to establish a settlement for free black Americans in Africa. In December of 1821, ACS agents acquired a 36-mile-long strip of land called Cape Mesuardo from Zolu Duma. Zolu Duma was the ruler of the indigenous people that lived in the area and was forced to give up the territory at gunpoint. By 1835, 5 more colonies were created by individual states of the U.S. The first colony in Cape Mesuardo grew in size through the use of force against the native tribes. In 1838, all of the settlements came together to create the Commonwealth of Liberia. The African-American colonists were called Americo-Liberians, and they treated the local population as savages. Most free people of color in the United States didn't really want to go to some random colony in Africa. They thought of themselves as Americans, and many of them had been in the Americas for generations. The idea of colonization lost popularity in the northern states, and some thought of the ACS as this evil organization that protected the ideals of slavery. They weren't exactly wrong. While the ACS was made of abolitionists with good intentions, it did also have slaveholders that wanted to deport free people of color. The settlers in Liberia had an insanely high mortality rate, and the ACS continued to send people anyway. The colonists were constantly attacked by the native African tribes, and they also had to deal with disease, harsh climate, a lack of food, medicine, and good shelter. The ACS eventually gave the Commonwealth more autonomy and appointed Joseph Jenkins Roberts, the first non-white governor, in 1841. In early 1847, the ACS advised the Liberian leadership to declare independence, and on July 26, 1847, the Liberian Declaration of Independence established the free and independent Republic of Liberia. It took a long time, but by 1862, all countries recognized Liberia as a sovereign nation. In the United States, Southern congressmen didn't want to recognize Liberian independence, but during the American Civil War, since the Southern congressmen weren't in the nation anymore since the South seceded from the country, whatever was left of the Union established the diplomatic contact with Liberia needed to recognize autonomy. The Americo-Liberians were basically the same as the European colonists in the Americas. They thought that they were superior to the native African tribes and married within themselves to prevent contamination. The Americo-Liberians had support from the U.S., which they used to establish plantations and businesses. Politically, the Americo-Liberians made sure that the native Africans couldn't vote in elections. Although the Americo-Liberians were only 5% of the population of Liberia, they held the key resources and controlled the natives. Now, overall, Liberia's economy wasn't the best. Most of the nation's economy relied on agriculture and exporting natural resources, but every other European colony in Africa was doing the same exact thing. So, Liberia relied heavily on the United States for loans, business, and military help. But the good for them, U.S. President William Howard Taft wanted to ensure Liberian independence and prosperity. So the U.S. would send armed forces to help Liberia end rebellions, and also train the Liberian army. In 1962, Firestone, an American rubber company, created a massive rubber plantation in Liberia, which created thousands of jobs and established the rubber industry as the most important part of Liberia's economy. So thanks to U.S. support, Liberia was able to defend itself against the European powers during the scramble for Africa, and they were able to shut down rebellions by the native population. the 15,000 Americo-Liberians had complete control over the 750,000 native Africans. But social tensions would increase over the 20th century, and Liberian President William Tubman would be forced to give the natives the right to vote, but he rigged the elections to keep himself in power anyway. Liberia was neutral during World War I, but joined on the Allied side in 1917 for World War II. Before World War I, Germany had been a huge trading partner, so since Liberia and Germany were on the opposite sides of the war and couldn't trade anymore, Liberia's economy became weak again. It was okay though, because in 1926 the rubber company Firestone I was talking about earlier established their huge rubber plantation and industry to fix Liberia's economy. Also, in 1942, Liberia signed a defense pact with the United States to provide the United States rubber and iron ore in exchange for protection since World War II was going on. This entire time, the Americo-Liberians had been in charge of the country by suppressing the native Africans. But a military coup in 1980 resulted with the death of the president and many of his ministers, and ended the rule of the minority Americo-Liberians over the indigenous Africans. After the military coup led by Samuel Canyon Doe, a provisional government called the People's Redemption Council took control of the country. Doe was a very paranoid person who was afraid of a counter-coup. He did have to overcome 7 different coup attempts as the government became corrupt. So Doe began a campaign of repression where he would ban political opposition, shut down newspapers, and jail reporters. He also rigged the presidential election in 1985 to get himself re-elected, as his nation experienced economic decline. There were 2 factors that led to the First Liberian Civil War. The United States really started to dislike Doe, so they stopped providing his government with the money that had been keeping them stable. And since Liberia's economy sucked and was carried by the U.S. support, the nation suffered tremendously. The second factor was that Doe's Khan tribe started attacking the Don and Mano tribes that had been organizing all the coups against the president. In 1989, a man named Charles Taylor created the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, or the NPFL, which was a rebel group comprised mostly of individuals from the Dan and Mano tribes. The war was basically the president's Khan tribe versus the Dan and Mano tribes, with thousands of innocent civilians killed by each side. By the middle of 1990, Taylor controlled most of the country and started his takeover of the capital, Monrovia. In September of 1990, Doe was captured and killed by the INPFL, which was a faction that split off from the NPFL created by Taylor. An interim government was created in Monrovia, with Dr. Amos Sawyer as the president, while the rest of the country was controlled by various rebel groups. The United Nations eventually got involved and tried to arrange multiple peace agreements. The interim government was also replaced with a Council of State. In August of 1995, Taylor finally agreed to a peace agreement that placed him and 2 other militia leaders as 3 out of 4 members of the Council of State. But some of his supporters ended up attacking the UN Observational Group's headquarters, so the war didn't end until August of 1996. The Second Liberian Civil War started in 1997, just a year later. Charles Taylor was elected president, but he was just as bad a president as Doe was. A rebel group from the First War renamed themselves to Liberians United for Reconciliation and Democracy, or LURD, and started attacking Taylor's government. Now, LURD was supported by Ghana, and Taylor had been helping out rebel groups in Sierra Leone, so because of that, Liberia had at least 2 other countries mad at it. By mid-2003, Taylor only controlled a third of his country. As the rebel groups closed in on the capital, and the presidents of Nigeria and US pressured Taylor from abroad, Taylor resigned and was exiled to Nigeria. Taylor had made an agreement that he would resign as president if an international peacekeeping force would be deployed to protect Monrovia from the rebel forces. With Taylor resigning and the peacekeeping force coming in, the Second Liberian Civil War had ended. Ever since the Second Civil War, Liberia had been repairing its economy and shutting down the remaining rebel factions. In 2005, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was elected and became the first African woman to become a president. So what originated as a group of settlements of freed slaves from the United States became a nation that survived the scramble for Africa and European colonization. And ever since its 2 civil wars, Liberia has been working on stimulating its economy and cracking down on corruption.